Wizard 101 is a game that means a lot to me, more than you guys could ever know. I made my account all the way back in August of 2009. I was 7 years old at the time, and as of today, at 23 years old, I still love this game. Yes, this game was played with a dreaded paywall, and I always ponder to this day how much bigger this game could have been had the paywall not existed. Because even with said paywall, the game managed to still build up and maintain a very sizable and loyal community that's still going on to this day for some odd reason. Think about all the MMOs that have come and gone, and yet for some reason, Wizard 101 is still here. And despite the fact that yes, it isn't as popular as it was in its prime, I could realistically see this game still going on for another few more years. I'm not sure if anyone else felt this way, but Wizard 101 for me was a game where I would be sitting there at school in class thinking about the fact that I got to play this game when I got home. Like, this was my childhood game. If you would have asked me, Sniffy, what is your favorite video game ever? It really was 101. To this day, I wholeheartedly believe that if my mom had not agreed to pay for the membership all those years ago, my life would have been drastically different. Now, whether it would have been better or worse is another conversation, but anyway. Now, I mentioned this at one point before, but one thing about Wizard 101 that has always plagued this game to some degree is that it is a very easy game. And the majority of the game gets very repetitive and boring because there is no real challenge if you just play the game normally. Teaming up with other people, doing side quests, farming for the right gear pieces, you know, things like that, right? So at some point in this game's life cycle, a good amount of players, myself included, said, hey, let's not just mundanely play the game the same way over and over again. Let's challenge ourselves. And so that's what we did. Challenges like the Wizlock were created, where you lock your level at the beginning of each world and can only unlock the level once that world is complete. Beating the game without dying, beating the game without using pips, etc. Soloing super hard boss fights that usually require 4 people. Now, pretty much every hard dungeon in this game has been soloed at some point. Literally every single one, all the way from Mount Olympus at level 30 to Wallery's final dungeon. Everything has been soloed. However, one dungeon in particular caught my attention almost a year ago today, and is why I'm making this video in particular. Darkmoor. Now, I already made a video on how Darkmoor specifically was soloed on a storm and how it was one of the greatest feats in this game's history. However, at the end of that video, I asked a simple question. Can Darkmoor be done completely deathless? So what I mean is, throughout Darkmoor, if you die on a certain boss, in which there are 8 of them and 10 fights in total, a normal person would just fight that same boss again over and over until they beat it. However, I'm apparently just not a normal person. I wanted to see just how far we could push Darkmoor, starting as a dungeon that was incredibly hard even for a full team, all the way to today where it has been soloed at level 100 by pretty much every school. But I took it even further. When I made my original Darkmoor video, I assumed that going through all 3 Darkmoor parts in a single run without dying a single time would be borderline impossible. Some time went by and I started going for the challenge just to see how far I could get, and as I kept going for it, me and my community kept making more and more discoveries about this challenge in regards to certain gear pieces, strategies that we hadn't thought about before, you know, things like that, right? So it got to a point where I had to make this video because we were actually starting to see more and more promise coming out of this challenge. However, there was a roadblock. This boss, Yevgeny Nightcreeper, who was the 6th and hardest boss of the run. We'll get to him a little later, but for right now, just know it took us months to figure out a consistent strategy to beat him, because he's an RNG nightmare that we would dive very deep into. With that being said though, despite everything, we were able to finally figure him out, and thus opening up the doors for this challenge to finally be laid to rest. Also, disclaimer for this challenge, we always discount death. It's a cheese school, come on. Truth be told, I owed it to my childhood sub to accomplish this. Darkmoor, for those of you who may not remember, is an iconic and legendary dungeon in this game. It came out as part of the level 100 update back in 2014, and of course, naturally, you have to be level 100 in the game to unlock it. Waves of people used to be lined up outside to find teams because at the time, Darkmoor housed the best gear in the game, thus explaining its immense difficulty. Now, Darkmoor used to be infinitely more difficult. However, a few years back, the entirety of PvE from Celestia onwards got a major HP nerf, making a lot of instances like Darkmoor a lot easier. That accompanied with a lot of nerfs to shadow spells such as glow bugs, which a lot of bosses in Darkmoor use, by the way, for some reason. But nevertheless, Darkmoor was something very special, and it's very special to me specifically. There is only one other dungeon that rivals how insanely popular this one was, and it's Waterworks. I have so many fond memories of stressful 14 runs of Darkmoor and Waterworks trying to go for that piece of gear, having teammates mess up boss sheets and all of us yell at them. Just kidding, don't yell at people. But it reminds me that this game in its prime was something very special, and it's unfortunate that the paywall made it so a lot of people missed out on that. I truly miss those times, I really do. But anyway, I started the grind in June of 2024. I finished it in December of 2024. I'll explain why this video took so long to make. But yes, after 5 long months of grinding this challenge specifically, I was finally able to bring it home, and also simultaneously in my eyes, finally beat my childhood game and lay it to rest. This is the story of the Wizard 101 Darkmoor Solo Deathless Challenge, and how I was able to beat it. One thing was abundantly clear. There was a challenge ahead of us. Before we get into the actual run, let's skip some context first. Darkmoor was released on November 25th, 2014 as part of the 4 Dungeons update. With this update, of course, came 4 dungeons, that being Kimberlong Village, which you unlock at level 25, Barkingham Palace at level 40, the House of Scales at level 60, and Darkmoor at level 100. Darkmoor was the most significant for 2 specific reasons. It was really difficult, and the gear you got from it was incredible. So Darkmoor has 3 tiers of gear drops you can get when you beat the dungeon. Now, the tier 3 gear is honestly nothing special. It's barely even an upgrade from something like Tartarus or Waterworks. The tier 2 gear is for sure, I guess, an upgrade to an extent though. However, what people really want is of course the tier 1 gear, which is only dropped from the final boss, Malistaire the Undying. This gear set is a huge spike in power for every school, giving you significantly more HP, damage, pip chance, resist, etc. as compared to its previous counterpart. As a matter of fact, the Malistaire robe specifically was so strong that it was a must-have robe for any meta gear setup up until like Merciless gear came out, which didn't come out until I think fall of 2021, by the way. 8 years after Darkmoor came out. Now, granted, the hat and boots got ruled out long before that as more worlds kept coming out. I remember the moment that the Professor Sword pack came out specifically, the boots from that pack immediately trumped the Malistaire boot. But the Malistaire robe was a staple for years because for the longest time we just weren't really seeing an upgrade to it for some reason. And while Dragoon gear was also one of the biggest power spikes we ever saw, the Dragoon robes were all pretty mediocre. Okay, they weren't horrific, but like in the sense that they didn't give damage or crit, which is obviously a necessity, especially in PvE. You want to maximize on as much damage and crit as humanly possible in PvE. And like I said, for a while, the Malistaire robe was the best you could have that provided that. Now with gear this strong, naturally, it was hard to obtain, and hard to obtain it definitely was. Darkmoor when it first came out was unforgiving, and even today, like I said, it could still give teams a hard time if you just don't know what you're doing. Now yes, the PvE overhaul made this dungeon not as much of a slug to get through, which in turn opened up the doors for this challenge to be completed. Now the rules for this challenge are very simple. You must lock your level at level 100, you can't use the death school, and you cannot flee or die at any point in the run. You must start from Darkmoor part 1 outside the castle, and the run isn't over until you complete all 3 parts of Darkmoor. Alright, it's time to go through it one fight at a time, explain my process, and how I was able to get through it. We decided to go with the Fire School for this challenge. Howling Chaney is up first and is naturally the easiest boss in the entire run. He's a life boss with 20,000 HP and has a few balance mobs around him with 5k HP. His cheats are nothing special at all. He simply has a cheat where if you cast any healing spell, he would cheat cast the gnomes on you. He also has a life interrupt cycle. Keep the term interrupt cycle in mind because you're going to be hearing it a lot in this video, trust me. Every other round he will interrupt cast a 12% life spell on himself, and at the beginning of every 3 rounds he will interrupt cast a life fuel on a random wizard. Now the strat for him was very simple. Just stack up a bunch of damage with the gear set, blade up, and go for a fire dragon and finish him off with a meteor strike afterward. This boss doesn't really pose a threat unless he gets an unlucky hungry caterpillar crit on you, and even then it still won't one-shot you, so you should still be fine. I'm pretty sure out of all the runs I ever did, I think I died on him maybe twice. So with Howling Chaney out the way, let's move on to fight number 2. Sir Blackwater is up next. He's a Star School boss with 18,000 HP. He has Storm, Life, and Death Mastery along with 35% Pierce, but has incoming boost to Fire, Ice, and Myth. He only has 30% Storm resist and has no resist towards any other school. This is where the boss cheats get a little silly though. Starting off with what this boss is most famous for, his Blade cheat, where if a wizard casts a positive charm or bubble spell, Sir Blackwater will interrupt cast to disarm on the wizard who cast the spell. Now in a team setting, this can be bypassed as all you have to do is just blade other teammates and not yourself and you'll be fine. However, in a solo setting, the only way to bypass this is by either using Aegis, a spell you won't even have access to at level 100, and or B, use Elemental or Spirit Blade, since they place multiple blades at once, and Sir Blackwater will only take the last blade placed from these 2 spells. Unfortunately, if you're Fire or Life, this won't work. Next, he counters negative charms like Weakness with Dark Pact immediately. However, AoE weakness spells like the Ruined Plague will bypass it. Now for his interrupt cycles, in which there are 3. His Death interrupt cycle, his Life interrupt cycle, and his Storm interrupt cycle. The first 5 rounds of the match are his Death cycle, where at the end of every round in this cycle, Sir Blackwater will interrupt cast Sacrifice on himself. Then at the beginning of the 5th round, he will interrupt cast Age of Reckoning, Virulence, Deathblade, then hit you with a Call of Cthulhu. This will then mark the beginning of the life cycle, which for the beginning of the next 5 rounds, he will cast Spirit Armor on himself, and at the beginning of the 5th round during this cycle, or in other words, the 10th round of the duel, he will interrupt cast Sanctuary, Cycle of Life, a Guiding Light, and Rebirth, healing him for a lot of HP. This of course goes into a Storm cycle, where at the beginning of every round during this cycle, or between the 10th and 15th round of the duel, he will interrupt cast Healing Current on himself. Then on round 15, he will interrupt cast Astrophobia, Galvanic Field, Stormblade, and Glowbug Squall. After this, the cycle just repeats over and over. Now outside of all of that, the other things that make this fight annoying are the minions, specifically the Darkmoor Squires. See, the Darkmoor Squires have this spell called Virulent Plague that they love to cast for some reason, and if they do, they make the run significantly longer and more tedious, and might even cost you the run depending on how bad it gets. They also have deathy spells, so if you plan on countering the virulent plague by using Empower, a death spell, sometimes they will death dispel you and plague you, to where you have to cast Empower twice to get rid of the plague. The Darkmoor Serb minions are annoying because they can cast Sirens and Leviathan, but that's still infinitely more preferable than VP. So my strategy for this fight went like this. On turn 1 and 2, I would go for a Wildfire and Furnace, whichever order I pull them in. This will allow me to increase my damage output without triggering Sir Blackwater's cheat. Then on turn 3, assumingly I don't get hit with Plague, I immediately go for a Fire Dragon, which as long as none of the minions shadow crit block me, then it's usually a guaranteed kill every time. After that, it's a simple 1v1 against Sir Blackwater. Now, because his cheats have him healing for a lot, doing chip damage is never the move against this guy. The best way to kill him is to one-shot. Luckily, Fire has this awesome spell called Backdraft. It's a per pip trap that can increase your damage output depending on how much pips you have, at 15% per pip, which is very solid. So the strategy at this point was to simply save up pips while using Fortify to defend myself. Once I'm in the 10 to 12 pip range, go for the backdraft play, do a little bit more trap stacking, and win the fight from there. Now, this Sir Blackwater run in particular was special because I managed to get pretty much perfect RNG. In that I didn't even have to heal during this fight. This is really rare, as most, if not all the time, you will have to heal at least once or twice in this fight, and I have personally had Sir Blackwater fights take well over 30 minutes. This fight, I kid you not, took 12 minutes, which is very impressive, and my fastest Sir Blackwater fight to date. So we're already off to an amazing start. Moving on to Darkmoor Part 2, we have a simple mob fight to start us off, marking fight number 3 out of 10. Once these Darkmoor Gargoyles are out the way, we can move on to fight number 4, Akhtang Wormcrawl, who is boss number 3 of 8. Now, Akhtang Wormcrawl is rather easy, pretty much the second easiest in the entire run. He has a blade sheet, which is pretty much the same as Sir Blackwater's, so we just trap stack for this fight. However, what makes this fight questionable are these annoying storm mobs next to him. Now, when beginning this fight, there's almost a guarantee that at least one of them will cast Stormlord, and if you're not going first, you will be stunned. I have stun block, and they triple Stormlorded me, and I end up getting stunned anyway. Yeah, I know, it's wild. From there, these minions love to spam these two spells, Wild Bolt and Insane Bolt. Now, I was able to cheekily make myself storm immune with the gear I was rocking, and people's reactions on stream were comedy. However, the Insane Bolt is the problem, because it doesn't apply storm damage, and instead applies moon damage. No one knows as to why Kingzon made this decision, but anyway, if you get spammed with the spell enough while being too cocky or getting too comfortable, this will definitely kill you without a shadow of a doubt, which is what happened to me on multiple occasions. Okay, now back to the run. Now, surprisingly, I didn't get stormloaded in this until towards the back half of the fight, but by this point, the fight was already won. The strat was simply to just focus on the boss first, get some triple feint action going, and one-shot him with a Godo King Art, then just heal and take the minions out from there. Also, fun fact, sometimes these minions will just Insane Bolt themselves, and it's the funniest thing ever. On to fight number 5 of 10. It is a mob fight that is slightly more annoying than the previous one because of the Ice Mob, who has access to Frost Giant, and he casts it every single time, I swear. But it's still very simple. It's a nice quick break from the impending chaos that's ahead of us, so just, you know, quick little intermission, I guess. Spirit of Darkmoor is up next, and it's fight number 6 of 10 and boss number 4 of 8. Now, Spirit of Darkmoor is sort of a preparedness check in my eyes. She is the perfect example of, if you come into this fight with the right gear and already understand our boss mechanics, this fight is relatively straightforward. However, if you come in with absolutely zero clue as to how she works, this fight will be an absolute nightmare for you. Now, we're going into this fight pretty much myth immune for 3 reasons. One, she obviously has myth mastery along with fire, life, and balance mastery. That's a hilarious combination. But 2, she has the Darkmoor Gargoyle minions alongside her as well, and this ensures that they really don't do damage to us at all. And 3, and most importantly, her trap cheat, which every time we try to trap her, she hits us with a cheat cast Assail that does 850 myth damage, which pretty much goes up to 1000 damage if you're trying to feint. However, because of how much resist we have, we're able to cut down the cheat to only doing around 100 to 150 damage, which is incredible. She has a myth, life, and fire interrupt cycle the last 5 rounds each, and pretty much on the end of each one, she does a big damage, same as Sir Blackwater. She also has a blade cheat, but we pretty much won't be blading until she's dead, so that doesn't really make a difference here. Another thing to note though is that if you kill the minions in one shot but don't kill her, she will revive all of them using Eternal Leviathan. There is a workaround this though. If her minions die to overtime effects, then you'll be perfectly fine. My strategy to beat her is still pretty straightforward. It's just a trap stack and try to one-shot her and get her out the fight as quick as possible. Now, in a perfect world, you want to kill her during her life cycle so that when she's dead, the Darkmoor Gargoyles would go back to doing complete 0 damage, because the myth bubble she uses at the end of her myth cycle gives them pierce. But it's not mandatory, it just helps a little bit. Anyways, we trap stack while of course keeping ourselves sustained with satyrs and a few main cast heals that were very clutch, let me tell you. Once the traps are ready to go, I was able to go for the one-shot with King Art and focus on the minions from there, similar to the previous boss fight. What makes Spirit of Darkmoor arguably easier than, say, Sir Blackwater, now that I think about it, is because she has only 14k HP, which is a lot easier to hit over than 18k. However, from a damage perspective, I think her cheats are a lot more oppressive. You guys can let me know in the comments who you personally think is the harder boss, though. On to fight number 7 and boss number 5 of 8, Shane von Shane 1. And he is a doozy. To draw you guys' memory, he sort of has that Belloc cheat thing going where if you don't damage him every round, he will punish you immensely for it. First, he'll hit you with a vampire that does 1050 damage. If you don't damage him for 2 rounds, he'll hit you with a Dr. Von's monster dealing 900 damage. And if you don't damage him a 3rd time, he'll hit you with a monster mask dealing 1170 damage, which is a very, very, very annoying spell that we will be talking about a lot later on in this video as well. The other significant things about him is that A, we can't feint him, and B, you will get punished for healing. Now, originally, the way I used to take this fight was kind of funny. I would legit just put on a full damage gear set and just try to kill everything as fast as possible. And while it was fun to go full YOLO, and it actually worked a decent amount of times, in a live deathless run, I got tired of losing runs to me being dumb and lazy. So I decided to finally commit to taking the fight slow every single time. Shout out to Kane, who's the original Darkmoor demigod, who I will link in the description, as he was a very big help in making this challenge even remotely possible. He put me onto some of the gear from the Christmas packs around the time that give a bunch of healing incoming and outgoing, as well as storm and death resist. This allowed me to be able to bypass the heal cheat and just heal through it if necessary. There are a few annoying things taken into account in this fight though. First thing is that Shane likes to spam infections a lot, whether it's the normal infection spell he has, the infection from Dr. Von's monster, or just him using Doom and Gloom. Like, dude, you already have a cheat that counters heals. Can you calm down? Anyways, I did come up with a little counter though. This evil snowman gambit is kind of sick because it'll remove the infections and give me 2 death shields in return, which is beautiful, let me tell you. The second thing to take into account during this fight are the stuns that can come from the Darkmoor gargoyle and the Leviathan that can be casted by the Darkmoor serfs, because this time we're bleeding. Going into this fight, I would usually want the Darkmoor serfs to go ahead and use their pips, because the moment they start saving their pips, that's when things get scary. For example, this actually happened in the live run where they decided not to hit on their first turn, which then forced me to have to just hit on turn 2 because I didn't want to risk my blade getting removed by Leviathan, which is exactly what ended up happening. Now, because our gear setup for this fight is just super death warded, we're running with pretty much horrific fire damage, meaning that the bulk of our damage is going to come from blade. So the best play there was just go ahead and hit and get some damage off instead of getting a full-on sharpened blade just wasted. With that being said, I was able to clean up the minions first, leaving me in a simple 1v1 against Shane on Shane. Now, funnily enough, our good RNG from Sir Blackwater extended all the way to Shane 1, and I didn't even have to heal in this fight at all. The resist that I was rocking was more than enough to sustain me all the way to the end of this fight. The rest of the 1v1 against Shane was pretty smooth, and thus allowing me to complete Darkmoor Part 2. Also, to quickly recap, if you notice in the raw footage I uploaded, I was able to solo Darkmoor Parts 1 and 2 in sub 1 hour. Yeah, listen, I'm not even trying to brag, but our RNG was that good. But now it comes down to the final part of the run. This is the final leg of the challenge. Only 3 more bosses stand in our way. Yevgeny Nightcreeper is up next, and he is fight number 8 of 10. And by far, the hardest fight in the entire run. I've already made an entire video on what makes Yevgeny so ridiculous, but don't worry, I have no problem refreshing you guys' memory. To start off, Yevgeny has 22,400 HP, the most we've seen so far. He has Ice, Myth, and Death Mastery, 3 of the consensus most annoying schools to go up against in PvE. Here's where it gets ridiculous. He has 55% outgoing Pierce. 55. He has 15% incoming boost to fire and storm, and interestingly enough, 30% incoming boost to life. On the opposite end, he has 30% resist to myth and death and 60% resist to ice. Next thing is this. This is his card pool. Easily the most cancerous card pool for a boss in this game's history. Now, if you're used to doing Darkmoor in a full team, you probably never even took his card pool into account, because in a full team, it doesn't matter as much, and you're not really ever gonna get the full brunt of all these spells. But when soloing, it's a completely different story. Starting from the top, he's got 4 different types of shields that he can use. The 2 infections he has is also annoying, because if you're planning on going for a heal strat, this could very well kill a run, as you won't be able to heal enough to keep yourself alive. He has 9 spells that stun. 9! Well, okay, 8, because he technically can't use Winter Moon since he can't use Ice Pips. And for some odd reason, he has quite possibly the most annoying spell to get hit with when soloing outside of Medusa, Monster Mash, which we'll come back to a little later. Oh, and of course, he has cheats. A lot of them. First, if you blade, Yevgeny stuns you off the rip. No questions about it. Bubble spells will also trigger this cheat. So if you thought you can get around it by using a bubble, you're mistaken. If you cast any shields, he would cast Pierce to get rid of it. And also, if that weren't enough, the minions also kind of have a cheat where if there are any lingering shields on you, they will cast Steel Ward to get rid of it as well. If you try to hit Yevgeny with any harmful charms such as weakness or plague, he would cheat cast bad juju on you. However, AoE negative charms can actually bypass this. Yevgeny, of course, also has 2 different cycles, his primary interrupt cycle and his secondary interrupt cycle. And of course, they overlap with each other. Rounds 1 through 5 is his ice cycle, where at the beginning of each round during this cycle, Yevgeny will cast frozen armor on himself or one of his 3 minions. This is already annoying, because if Yevgeny chooses to save his pips during this cycle, you'll have to deal with a bunch of beefy frozen armor shields either on him or his minions. Then at the beginning of the 5th round during the cycle, he buffs himself like crazy and hits you with the beefy Abominable Weaver. And because he has 55% pierce, this thing will hurt no matter what. Round 6 through 10 is his Myth interrupt cycle, where at the beginning of these rounds, he will cast a buff minion on himself or one of his allies. It's basically just 50% balance blade. Then he hits you with the buff Mystic Colossus on turn 10, which surprisingly is the most tame out of the 3 interrupt cycles. Then rounds 11 through 15 15 is his Death Interrupt cycle, where at the beginning of each round he will cast Feint on you. Then at the beginning of round 15 he hits you with the buff Call of Cthulhu. To make matters worse, you also have to deal with his secondary interrupt cycle, where on rounds 3, 6, and 9 he hits you with Shift Chaney, Shift Akhtang, and Shift Blackwater respectively. And during the Myth and Death cycle, because Yevgeny may have a buff on him or a feint on you, these will hit way harder than it says. Okay, now that we explained what makes him so ridiculous, let's get into how I was able to finally find a consistent strat to beat him. Now initially the strategy was to pretty much go like full YOLO, triple feint stack and go for, I kid you not, a spell element buffed elephant and kill him with just about 1000 HP to spare. However, that might be the most inconsistent plan in the history of gaming. So much can go wrong in literally the first turn if you're going for the strategy, and if you have no out for it, then the run is basically dead. But because at the time I didn't have a consistent way to beat him, I was consistently getting deathless runs all the way to Yevgeny and just getting body turn 1 by him trying to go for this strategy. It was the most boneheaded thing ever, I swear. That was until I took a step back and stopped overcomplicating it. The strat to consistently beat him wasn't some grand conspiracy like I initially thought. It wasn't some big brain strat that no one in history would ever think of. Eventually, if not me, somebody would have. I just happened to be that person. The strategy I came up with that started working was this. First and foremost, stack as much ice resist and healing incoming and outgoing as humanly possible. We're gonna take this fight very slow and very steady. I was able to come up with a gear set to where the minions don't do that much damage at all, and pretty much one satyr can almost give me back to full HP. With this, now we're not scared of monster mass just ending this fight completely. Next, we stack a good amount of satyrs and make sure to heal on the turns where the cheats come in, and I know I'm going to be taking a lot of damage back to back. For example, like on round 9 where you get hit with the secondary cheat cycle, then on turn 10 he hits you with the Call of Cthulhu cheat that comes in immediately after. In between those rounds, I continue to trap stack using feints and fire trap. One thing I do have to note is that I replaced Conviction with Stun Block, and here's why. You see, Conviction is very good for this fight if you were in a team and are planning to kill Yevgeny by turn 4, or if you're just taking the fight fast, period. If you're in my situation though, Stun Block is much more preferred. For one, it's guaranteed protection, which the amount of times I got stunned through Conviction is part of what inspired this change anyway. But on top of that, Conviction only lasts 4 rounds, and after that you immediately go back to being vulnerable to stun. And while yes, you can get horrible RNG to where Yevgeny and his minions just don't like you that day, most of the time you don't get stunned that much. You will definitely eat a Frost Giant at some point, at least once in the fight, and maybe Yevgeny will hit you with one of his stun options. However, a lot of times it won't happen within the first 4 turns of the match. So there were times where I did use Conviction, but they just didn't stun at all, and then as soon as Conviction was gone, they stunned. Meanwhile, Stun Block stays on until you get stunned no matter what, and in this fight, removing as much RNG as humanly possible was the best way in making sure that the strategy would work. So to actually break it down, the consistent strategy to beat Yevgeny is as follows. First, stacking a bunch of ice resistant healing incoming and outgoing as possible. Stun Block on turn 1, that's a must. Then trap stack with fire traps and feints, whichever ones you pull first, it doesn't make a difference. Healing on turn 5 is a must because you get hit at the end of turn 6 as well. Then you probably need to heal on turn 9 because you end up getting hit at the end of that turn as well, and then you probably have to heal again on turn 10. Now, I got lucky on my run because he monster mashed me on turn 4, so as turn 5, a bomb cheat got skipped because of the Beguile, which saved an extra satyr. But as long as you keep yourself sustained in the fight, you can go ahead and trap stack as much as possible. Make sure you carry Shatter All or just a Shatter, which is why I had Myth Pips. Get rid of any lingering shields from his Ice Interrupt cycle or just his minion shield spamming because they will do that. I got lucky again in my run to where he pretty much didn't have any shields on him, and I surprisingly was able to kill him on turn 8 of the fight, which might be the best RNG I've ever gotten in this fight ever. From here, I just went on to boringly kill the minions because they had a bunch of shields on them, and this took a while, so I'll just speed up this part real quick and move on to the next boss. But this was huge, as in all the runs I'd ever done of this challenge, this was only one of 3 live runs that ever got past Yevgeny, which goes to show just how ridiculous this boss is. Shane 2 is up next and is the penultimate boss fight of the entire challenge. Shane 2 is kind of similar to Shane 1 in that he has the same cheat cycle from the first fight. However, now he has a bunch of storm spells, a really annoying supercharged blade cheat, a semi-annoying storm cycle cheat, 4k more HP than before, oh, and also a piston appears. Where it gets interesting though is that he doesn't have storm mastery. So majority of the time, even with a bunch of storm blades on him, he'll usually just use death spells. Usually. Now I'll explain why I said that in a bit. Now here's the game plan for him. First, you need to get rid of those minions, as they make this fight infinitely harder. Because we're not rocking any myth with storm resist, they start packing way more of a punch than in the previous fight. So my goal was to try and get the minions out by turn 3. However, unfortunately, I didn't draw a second stackable blade, so I was forced to just hit on turn 2, so that Shane's cheat wouldn't trigger and go into Monster Mash and lock me out of a turn. Which we'll come back to that Monster Mash thing in a bit. Now, the Darkmoor Surf AI is surprisingly decent to where if they take damage without dying and they have the pips for it, at some point they will cast a healing card, which is very annoying. However, one thing you'll notice is that on some of these turns, actually on a lot of these turns, I'll be storm set shielding, and this is for one main reason: to avoid getting one-shotted. Because of the supercharged cheat alongside a storm storm interrupt cycle, and now we aren't rocking any storm resist. I mean, we are, it's just he pierces all of it off because I only have like 49 storm resist on this build, so there's that. There is a good chance that Shane will one-shot you, either with Glowbug, Wild Bolt, or Stormlord if he decides to use any of those. I once got hit by Shane for 7k. I wish I was joking. Now, eventually I am able to get a second Fire Dragon off, thus allowing me to focus on Shane himself. Now, here's where the fight gets very interesting because of one reason: Monster Mash. Now, for some reason, this fight is actually glitched. Normally what's supposed to happen is that if you don't hit, Shane will cycle through his death cycle cheat, you know, his Vampire, Dr. Von's Monster, and then Monster Mash. However, because Monster Mash beguiles you, what's supposed to happen is that after the Monster Mash, if you continuously not hit, the cheat is supposed to skip the Vampire, but at that point, it's just cycle between Dr. Von's Monster and Monster Mash. Now, this is the case in the Shane 1 fight. However, in the Shane 2 fight, it's glitched, where for some reason the cheat cycle doesn't reset. After the Monster Mash happens, if you continuously just don't hit, you'll just get hit with infinite Monster Mash. It will never reset back to Vampire or Dr. Von. Now, this is a good thing and a bad thing at the same time. If the minions are dead by the time that the reigning Monster Mashes happens, then it's not that bad. You can just single target hit them during the off turn, you'll be fine. However, if the reigning Monster Mashes happens while the minions are still alive, you are basically screwed. Because what happens is you are locked out of using AoE hits, period. Meaning the only out for this situation is to literally just try your best to kill Shane first. Now, the other slight upside to this, though, is that you won't have to take the infection from Dr. Von's Monster, and you can still heal while beguiled. On top of that, on the turn you are beguiled, you're able to see what Shane is about to cast alongside what the minions are about to cast. So it's iffy because mostly it sucks, but it can kind of work in your favor depending on the situation. But overall, this still needs to be fixed. It's kind of funny how it's never got fixed. Anyway, the fight gets to a point where I end up just Storm Shield spamming because I wasn't pulling anything else, but I wasn't mad about it. It was just funny. But I end up pulling out a strat that I used way back on Sir Blackwater, which is Backdraft. After sustaining myself with a bunch, and I mean a bunch of Satyrs and Storm Shields, I'm able to eventually get a max pit Backdraft off. Stack a few blades, a few more traps, a furnace for good measure, and finally go for game with a King Artorias, which ends up doing 28,000 damage. The one shot on here is very crucial for this fight, since when you hit him, he immediately cheat casts Healing Current. And with that, we are on to the final fight of the challenge. It was finally time to take Malistaire down once and for all. And even though he isn't exactly the hardest one in the graveyard, he still is easily the most time consuming. And he actually has the potential to be the most difficult based on the circumstances. Malistaire's difficulty is more based on the minions rather than him. See, his minion pool works way differently than every other boss in Darkmoor. His is completely random, and the Draconians that accompany him can be a mixture of all 7 schools. From my experience, if you get Ice, Myth, Death, or Storm, the run is basically over. The Myth Draconians have Earthquake and Blinding Light. Storm mobs have Stormlord, Glowbugs, and everyone's favorite, Insane Bolt. Storm Dragon is also problematic as well. The Death Draconians have Monster Mash, and the Ice Draconians have Frost Giant and Abominable Weaver. However, ideally, if you get a mixture of, say, Balance, Fire, or Life, then the run can definitely work. You may be able to get by with one of the problematic school minions, and the rest of the schools are unproblematic, but that is still a very hard maybe. I was praying so hard that I got a solid minion pool because at this point, it was all or nothing. Now, I shouldn't have to go too deep into Malistaire's mechanics. Even if you haven't ran Darkmoor in years, you probably remember just how ridiculously loaded his cheats are. Universal traps don't work, universal negative charms don't work, universal damage blades don't work. For some reason, he counters elemental and spirit diffuse, which is the most random thing ever because no one uses these anyway. He has his primary and secondary interrupt cycles, of course, and everyone's favorite, his second life. Okay, let's end this once and for all. I start the fight off by fortifying in order to mitigate some of the damage from the minions. Even though his primary interrupt cycle will get rid of my aura at some point, it still is nice to have on the turns that it's up. Next, getting rid of the minions is the main priority. Because these minions are infinitely more tanky than the ones we've seen before, this takes a while. This entire first portion of the fight is just trap stacking and healing, and that's it. Once done with that, we are finally able to go ahead and fire drag, killing and honestly overkilling the minions by a lot. And now at this point, it comes down to just me and Malistaire. Now, because normal Malistaire doesn't have too much pierce, this specific section of the fight actually is pretty easy. We're able to restack our traps and keep ourselves comfortable in the fight long enough to knock him out into a shadow form. I decided not to doom and gloom in this fight at all because it's just way safer to keep Sanctuary up rather than casting doom and gloom and then going back to casting Sanctuary after that. Once he's in his shadow form, this is where counting turns matters a lot. Because his primary interrupt cycle turns into a shadow version that does infinitely more damage. It's a constant cycle every 4 rounds where he sets up a big hit with Shadow Blade, Shadow Trap, and Shadow Spear, then he deals 1600 shadow damage, which that plus the buffs is around 3000 damage, which of course is very scary. I had to reshuffle ready to go, so I was able to get everything back that I had already used, and all those juicy traps that were stacked on those minions earlier can now be placed on Malistaire in his shadow form. I had a few close calls where his shadow cheat just did a truckload of damage. With that being said though, about 40 minutes later, and a lot of traps stacked and 2 blades for good measure, this happened. Yeah, I'm not too high and mighty to admit that I got kind of emotional when I completed this, and if that makes me cringe, I genuinely don't care. I understand that this isn't exactly the definitive hardest challenge you could ever go for in this game, even though it is tough, but this to me was me finally beating the game. One of the reasons why I started going for this in the first place was because throughout my years of playing this game, I never got fulfillment from just maxing characters over and over. Fun fact, I still haven't finished Wallaroo, and I probably won't ever finish it, quite frankly. Okay, I'm lying, I will. But what makes Darkmoor so special for me is because it reminds me of a time that I took for granted. When I was a little kid and seeing this area just packed to the brim with people every single day, it was some of the best and most fun I've ever had playing video games, period. Darkmoor is iconic for that reason. When it came out, it was massive. It was something no one was expecting, and I would say this is where Wizard 101 was truly at its peak. Yes, I know Darkmoor has been nerfed and it is a shell of its former self in terms of how immensely difficult it used to be, but this challenge, even with that, still took me 6 months of finding new strats, new pieces of gear, my community helping me out along the way. Every part of this challenge was some of the most fun I've had playing this game since I was a kid, and that's why this was so special to me, because going for this challenge made me feel like a kid again. I feel like I beat the game because now I genuinely don't have the desire to go for anything else. I think I beat Wizard 101. I beat my childhood game. The first time I ever played this game was in August of 2009, and I finally feel like I beat the game. Like I said, as corny as it sounds, it's true. It's kind of just how I feel. Anyway, I genuinely hope you guys enjoyed this video. This was a heartfelt video for me to make. It took a while simply because, for one, laziness. Two, for the past few months, I've been moving to a new place, as well as running my TikTok account, which we are almost about to hit 550,000 followers on there. So if you guys haven't already, go follow me on TikTok. It'll mean the world to me. But also sub to the channel or leave a comment at least. I don't know, something. If you made it this far, you're great either way. So you honestly, at this point, you have no obligation. But anyway, with all that being said, I just want to say thank you all so much for watching. As you guys can tell, I am very out of practice with making long-form content. I have a lot of incredible videos coming this summer, and I cannot wait to share them with you all. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Thank you all so much for being here, and as always, I'll see you on the next one.